I was going to talk a little bit about an aspect of Dzogchen, but I think I'll save it for Wednesday.
Oh, not question a anything then. Go ahead. Go ahead. Start early.
Can you do it both times?
I can. I'll be redundant. Okay.
You can start up on it. You can practice on us.
The most essential teaching in Dzogchen is 3 steps. Technically, it's called the 3 statements of Garab Dorje. But it's three instructions. The first is to be introduced to reality, to make contact, to get a direct experiential basis on the fact that there is actuality as it is. The second one's the one I really wanted to talk about. The second one is literally the way it's put is a little obscure. It's called to decide upon one thing. But what that means is commitment. And I want to talk about these two in relation to you've probably heard me use a metaphor of stepping off the side of a bank of a stream onto a rock that's in the middle of the stream to get across the stream. And I've talked about this many times. But this illustrates these 2 steps perfectly. So the first step in Dzogchen, getting direct experiential basis of reality, is analogous to discovering that there's a rock that you could step onto, maybe. And then, you poke at it, you prod at it, you look at it, you walk around and think about it, you wonder if it's safe, and maybe you sort of reach your toe out and poke it, and I don't know, looks like it might be steady, I don't know. So that's all still the first step, where you're playing with the notion that, wow, there's this whole other way of being with this than where we start from, than our ignorance and our normal version of things. And this is in line with what I have called noticing, which is again exploring your experience to discover the actuality of experience outside the context of what you're used to interpreting it as being, outside of your normalcy, outside of your normal worldview. And that's all in the first step. But the second step is interesting, and it's a little subtle in a way. The second step corresponds to when you actually transfer your weight off the shore onto the stone that's in the river. You commit. You commit. You leave one thing and go to another with finality. And this is what realization actually consists of, is this second step. Because it's very easy to have these sorts of experiences which are being addressed by the first step of noticing, of discovering, wow, there's this amazing stuff, and all this kind of thing. But still, there's sort of it and you, and it's sort of out there, and there's you that's over here sort of checking it out. Which is analogous to the sort of the typical role of being a seeker, where there's this thing over here, and even though you may have really strong experiential basis of its actuality, still there's kind of it and you. There's still some kind of a hesitancy or a lack of consummation. And this second step is really important. And it's committing, it's definitively leaving, rejecting the old way and saying, no, this is not true, this is true, this is my basis for operating, this is my basis for orienting. And you completely take your weight off the foot that's on the shore, and you put your weight on the foot that is on the stone. And at that point, you're standing in the middle of the stream on the stone. And something kind of interesting happens there. Of course, the metaphor falls apart. But but it's kind of nice in a way because once you step onto the stone, you discover that you're not actually on a stone and there never was a shore and everything is completely different, which leads to the third step, which we don't need to really worry about now because that takes care of itself. But I wanted to talk about that second step because I think the first step gets talked about a lot. You know, we talk a lot about noticing. We talk a lot about exploring the experience, checking out, discovering that there's other ways to see things, other aspects of things. But the second step is what you do. Okay, cool. So what do you do about it? Mm-hmm. And the second step is when you get to the point where you really get that there's a there. The second step is, well, go there. You know, just go there. Just up and leave. You know, make the commitment. Make the follow through to really leave, reject fantasy, and move into reality. Even though at first, of course, there's a transition period of oh wow, what just happened, and you know it's not necessarily all clear and simple, but still in all that transition point is really of the essence. It's very important, and I think that's probably not really talked about too much in spirituality. That step, a lot of attention is given to the first step of, you know, discovering that, wow, there's this other amazing condition or what have you. So anyway, that's what I thought I'd talk about.
Is that the second step voluntary? I mean...
Not necessarily, but it has to be an actuality.
It's an actuality, but you don't choose, I am now going to put my weight on that stone. You find yourself on that stone.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Probably. But it is, you know, it's not necessarily voluntary, but it can involve voluntary aspects of commitment to really, you know, hey, wait a minute, I want the real thing. I'm sick of settling for bullshit. I'm sick of playing it safe. You know, I want
a certain amount of intention.
Yeah.
Not like when you intend to learn to balance on a bicycle. At some point, balance happens. You don't do the balancing, but you're aiming there.
Yeah.
The intention, it seems to me, is more in the way of exploring.
Yeah.
So it's like seeing what you've just discovered.
Yeah.
And that is a complex process.
Yeah. Well, intention in that sense is more part of the first step, where you're checking out and investigating, and in the second step, it's too late to have intention. At that point, all bets are off. You're through the looking glass, and then you're a newborn. You've been born into a new world, and you naturally grow into it.
But the intention that I was referring to is like exploring this new world, or this new reality, or new whatever it is. And because I imagine you can just say, oh, I'm there and that's it, and never think about it again, or never be aware of it. I don't know if you can.
I can't imagine that.
But I mean, there's a whole learning process. That
Absolutely.
Comes with that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, it's like, I mean, it's analogous to being born into an unexpected world, and you're a newborn, and you grow up within it, and there's a definite learning curve. There's a definite maturing with how subtly and sophisticatedly you are with it, and the more greater depth you learn what it is, what you are, what's going on. You kind of learn the ropes on an ongoing basis, experientially.
I can imagine though somebody becoming frightened somewhat and shutting down, and then that intention or exploration stops.
Yeah, but then you're basically going back to the shore. You're going back to the first step.
Right.
I mean, I think that's why in Dzogchen they use this verb to decide in the way that they put it, because it involves, it's not necessarily intentional, but it involves a commitment of like, it's like being born, you don't like poke your head out of the womb and, I wonder if I want to go there. You're going. Ain't no going back. And this transition is an important aspect of really inhabiting spirituality rather than just playing with it, playing at it, having it be something in your life that is kind of cool and really neat and interesting and valuable and all that. But this is like moving into it, really owning it.
I sort of wonder about myself, when I think of what you're saying, like, a lot of times I find myself doing, like different kinds of Sanskrit recitation and ceremonies and stuff like that, and it's sort of like, it's easy to sort of go back into that a little bit because it's a time filler, It's good between 8 and 10 at night, or
but this is less about what you do than about what your home base is, sort of what your center of gravity is.
Right.
It's really not. It's behavioral at all. It's more subtle than that. It's just your sort of primary orientation. Where your center of gravity is, where your home base is. And from there, there's no holds barred. You can go anywhere and do anything. You can go into complete innocuous, neurotic, crazy stuff, and it doesn't matter because you're doing it from this other mode rather than from the old mode of fear-based and caution-based and separation-based.
Right. Yeah.
Well, and it seems to me, Peter, that the deciding is actually about realizing that that's where you are anyway. It's not actually, it's like you're actually looking around and confirming that in fact you have left the shore.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. But it's a certain point where it becomes, wait a minute, this is it, and there's no going back.
Right.
This is real. This is what this is. It's like it's a transition from one thing into another. It's like through the looking glass or being born or something where you're in a different world fundamentally than you previously thought you were.
I was reading Longchen Pa, the chapter called "The Decisive Experience," and he was talking about he's talking about introduction to awareness as Dharmakaya, and he talked about two ways of doing it. One is you just introduce the student to awareness and as Dharmakaya. Then there's like another way where it's broken down into 6. And in all those, he talks about having a student do practices like the ones you suggest. They seem somewhat like noticing unfindability, things like that. And then while the student is noticing unfindability, introduce them to awareness as Dharmakaya. And I was just wondering now, is that analogous to the 2 steps that you're talking about?
Well, that's still analogous. That's still the first step.
Okay.
Being introduced to it is the first step. I mean, it's kind of shades of gray. It's not like there's necessarily literally 2 steps, but in effect, it's a matter. It's possible to be with this stuff and to be with it in a way like you're kind of window shopping. But it can still be very profound and intimate and engaged, but still there's a certain stance of window shopping where there's another, then there's a whole other mode where you're on the staff.
Yeah.
You're in the window, you're doing the window dressing, you're on salary, you're not outside looking in, you're definitely inside. It's not a matter of that there's necessarily 2 steps or that there are necessarily steps or anything, but it's really a matter of making the distinction that this aspect of commitment, this aspect of really inhabiting this stuff is of the essence, as opposed to just sort of, checking it out and having it in your life and thinking that's enough.
Right.
I mean, it's not that it's not enough. That's fine. If that's where you go with it, that's where you go with it.
So back to John's question, are there ways of arousing the intention, or is it more like you do the first step enough times, you play with it enough, that you get some kind of confidence?
Well, there may or may not be. I mean, it's all down to your own faculties, which are unique. So whatever resources you individually have to bring to bear on your process, you can exercise them or not. I mean, as he said, and I think rightly so, the second step kind of happens to you rather more generally more than something you decide to do. But on the other, but not necessarily. There can be a kind of a well, it's like Jed McKenna. It's like you remember the whole story about about the guy who he's in a skyscraper and his office catches on fire. Mm-hmm. Remember that story? It's like, that's how much you have to want this. I mean, it's like it's indicating a level of commitment, a level of like, it's not like you're considering the possibility. You're like, I'm out of here.
Right. There's a certain desire or longing or movement in that direction, and there's fear things too based on beliefs like whatever. Right. And so, I can't do my job. Or,
right. Exactly. And that's all first step phenomena.
Yeah.
Second step phenomena, you've already either said fuck it or resolved that, or in some sense that's no longer the issue.
Right.
Mm-mm. And whether or not something you say or just you find yourself in that state is, probably a matter of your individual, what it looks like for you.
Is there actually a transition between the first and second step? I mean,
no, it's not literally a transition.
But
it feels very different.
It is completely different.
Yeah.
But I imagine that there is a way that you can step through. You can actually say, I'm going to put my foot over there and transfer my weight and do it consciously.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know how that would work, but
yeah. It's because everyone is so unique in terms of the faculties we bring to bear in our process, and so it's all bets are off in terms of what it looks like. But I can well imagine that it could be like that.
I can imagine that there's a stepping through something for some people.
I mean, in my process, there was an enormous amount of very intentional engagement for years. That sort of was a kind of a chipping away at this.
Before your experience with your teacher, or after?
No, after. The experience with my teacher was my first step.
Okay.
And that's where I saw, oh my God, there's this entirely, radically other thing going on here than I had suspected. That was actual and undeniable. It was, it was a reality in my experience. But I didn't. But there was there was two worlds. There was that world, this astounding thing that I had revealed to me, and then there was the world of my normalcy, my history, my personality, my karma, my life, that I still seemed to be in, and I just couldn't see how does this work? What's the relationship between that and this and all of that? And for me, it was a long, bloody, very intentional struggle for 20-some years of really thrashing around and just basically chipping away at the barrier consciously and unconsciously in every which way. And then when I actually made the step, when I actually did the second step, it was kind of a non-event. Mm-hmm. It was just a completely gentle, just.
Wasn't it a relief?
Achievable relief, astounding relief. I couldn't believe it at first, because I like to say, this isn't what I think it is. So in other words, what it looks like and what you do about it, so to speak, is there's no rules. It can look like anything. But the thing is to understand this, that there are these two aspects. Mm-hmm. It's very important to have an experiential engagement with actuality to some degree. In other words, if it's all theoretical, you can't do the second step. You have to do the first step before you can do the second step. You have to have experiential actuality of this condition. And then how you get from there to the second step is left to your genius, is left to your karma.
I feel like I just experiment or get glimpse. I'm getting the implications of the first step gradually, by being open to different perspectives and open to the fact that I might not know what's going on, and then paying attention and realizing different ways in which that's true, and while mostly kind of functioning the way I did, except it seems like usually better and more happily than before, and then at the same time waiting for more glimpses and getting them throughout the day, or actually sitting there with the intention to do some kind of noticing, and there's no telling how far I am, to what degree.
Yeah, and that's all great. That's all totally viable. I mean, because there's no rules. It's just up to your individual genius. One way to look at it is in terms of the metaphor of moving from having your weight on the shore to having your weight on a stone that's precariously balanced in the middle of a stream, or maybe not so precariously balanced. Is you can there can be a prolonged period where one foot's on the shore and the other foot's on the stone, and it's just a question of where your center of gravity is. Because initially your center of gravity is predominantly on the leg that's on the shore, and there may be a certain percentage of it that's on the stone. And maybe very gradually, maybe very suddenly, maybe in fits and starts, maybe very smoothly, but however, it works out that at a certain point, all of a sudden, the majority of your weight, more than 51% is all of a sudden on the stone, and at that point, I'm standing on the stone.
Yeah.
And so this is what we're talking about in terms of the transition into this second step. It's about shifting your weight from the shore to the stone, and it doesn't need to be like you jump necessarily. It can be very gradual. It can be tentative. It can be a little bit of this and back and forth, whatever. But this is what it really gets down to. Is at a certain point, the scale tips. That's the second step, when that scale tips. And again, there's no rules, so you're on your own. You're up to your own feedback. You have to. It's down. This is a game of intelligence. It's down to your own genius at being able to assess, and your own inspiration at being able to sense where you are, what you need, what's working and what isn't, and what you're aware of and what you're not, because you got to kind of intuit when things are working, but you're not aware that they're working. It's it's very all bets are off. Anyway, I didn't mean to railroad tonight on this one topic. It's just something I wanted to talk about. So. Yeah.
Okay. Somebody on the internet wants to know, what do you think about this whole idea of the, I scrolled out of the way, the 21st, the end of the world on the 21st. What do you have to say about it? I said, seriously, step one. Step one and then step two. Or kiss your ass. Yeah. Then later on, they say,
that's a complicated issue. It's complicated by the fact that there is no world, there is no end, there is no beginning. On the other hand, the 21st will come and go, and shit will happen. And planets may or may not explode, but that's just another, it's just business as usual.
well, you have to ask, what is the 21st? What does that mean?
And what's the world? What's an end?
Plus, it's only 5 days away, so just be patient.
Wait and see. Doesn't matter what Peter thinks about.
I will draw your attention to Y2K.
Yes.
In terms of a metaphor glossary of what you're talking about with the stone, are you primarily talking about seeing reality from a particular viewpoint? Because earlier, as an example, you said, well, you see that certain perspective, you see that you can have a number of perspectives. So,
I would, instead of a viewpoint, I would use the phrase frame of reference. And when you're on the shore, that refers to having any or some frame of reference with regard to your approach to reality. When you're on the stone in the stream, you are with reality without a frame of reference. Which doesn't necessarily mean the non-existence of frames of reference, but you don't hold yourself to be within them or without them, or they're just there. So you're not within the world in an interpretive framework.
well, in order to do that or get to that step, there is a situation where something sees that a particular way of being and seeing and your ground had been a certain way. Had been lived in as if that was reality.
Right.
Suddenly, that is no longer. Suddenly, you're out of that.
Yes.
In fact, there's a shift out of that.
Yes.
Into a different one.
Right.
So then, if there's one and a different one, then neither one of them have any validity.
Right.
Because
And that's great. But that's an intermediary stage of discovering that the arbitrariness of frames of reference. See, when we're really naive, we believe wholeheartedly that our frame of reference is objectively true, and we don't even question it. We're basically fundamentalists. Okay? When we begin to explore that, wow, wait a minute, there's alternatives. There's other frames of reference that can be radically different than this frame of reference, but that are equally viable. And that's when you're, as Don Juan might say, at that point you're a sorcerer. You're a magician. You're able to jump into different universes. But that's still the first step. That's still playing with the different modes of what the possibilities are here.
Okay. So there's the seeing that, and it's like and that seems to be a frame of reference. Seeing one
Right.
from
Okay.
a perspective.
Right. Okay.
The seeing itself is probably another frame of reference.
Right. Sure. Maybe. Yeah.
So that's like a safe space too, because
Sure.
that is a shore
Yeah.
from which you see perspectives.
Right.
Yeah. So, are you then talking about actually in terms of frames of reference or viewpoints, just jumping into one or another?
No. You're become free of frames of reference. Frames of reference no longer are relevant. They may or may not be present to various degrees, but they're no longer relevant. They're no longer true or not true.
So, what is
And
accessing...
what you're relating to is what is outside the frame of reference, or beyond the frame of reference, both inside and outside. Because the frame of reference, of course, exists in a context, and the context has nothing to do with the frame of reference. That context is reality. The frame of reference is basically an interpretation. It's an interpretive house of cards. It's an interpretive worldview. It's a brilliantly interlocked network of interpretations with greater or less coherence that presents it an interpretive narrative of what reality is. But that frame of reference exists within reality. It's an interpretation of something. Okay, and so all frames of reference are essentially that. They're networks of interpretation of actuality. And so as long as you're jumping frames of reference, you're still relating to frames of reference, not to actuality. It's when you commit to letting go of the frame of reference as relevant. It's not like you need to destroy it or anything. It's not that it's evil. You just let go of it and start relating to the terrain that the frame of reference exists within, which exists both within and without the frame of reference. The idea of inside and outside isn't really applied. That's what the second step is. You know, there's another analogy that I used kind of early on. I don't think I've used it in the last few years, of being in the house or out of the house, which is actually equally relevant to what we're talking about. So being in the house is like just being in a frame of reference. Being out of the house is being outside the frame of reference. And the stages of going from being in the house to outside of the house might be, the first stage is you're just in the house and you don't even know you're in the house, you're just oblivious and you're living your life happily inside the house, you don't even know it's a house and you don't even know you're in it, you're just carrying on. And then the second stage might be analogous to discovering that there's a window and discovering that, wow, maybe this window is giving me an image of something somewhere else, something else that's not here. And so, wow, and all of a sudden that's really interesting. But you still go on carrying on doing your stuff inside the house. You just, and every now and then you glance, you look out the window, or maybe you even sit and stare out the window if you're a maniac. but you're still in the house and you're living your life within the house. And a third step might be you discover there's a door, and the door isn't locked, and it opens, and you might open the door and sort of poke your head out, and then you come back in and you carry on with your stuff in the house, and you're still living in it. Every now and then you open that door and you poke your head out and you go, oh, wow. Close the door again, go back in. The fourth stage is you open the door, and you just leave it open. And then maybe you go outside, maybe you come inside, but at that point there's no inside or outside, it's all just space. But you're no longer containing yourself to the house. The house is just one of the places you can be, and outside is another place you can be. And they're quite different, but they aren't other than each other. Whereas before they seemed very other. There was an inside and an outside, and you were inside, and that was outside. So in this example, the first three stages are analogous to the first Dzogchen stage, and then the fourth stage, where you open the door and leave it standing open, is analogous to the second Dzogchen principle of his commitment to the house is irrelevant. It's not that you have to leave the house, but you can. You can go outside, you can go inside, and it's not any different, because the space outside and the space inside is the same space when the door is standing open. So again, this is not about, frames of reference are not evil, they're not the enemy, but instead of orienting to these frames of reference as reality, you orient to the actual reality as reality, and then you can use frames of reference as convenience or not. They just are not particularly relevant.
Getting back to your first metaphor, I'm still there. Two things. One is that when you step on that stone in the water, there is no stone once you step on it.
Right. You mean when you commit to it?
When you commit, when you're on that stone, there isn't a stone.
Yeah, the stone goes away, the stream goes away, the shore goes away.
Yeah. The second thing is that before you step on that stone, you can talk about this in varying levels of success to other people.
Oh yeah.
But once you're on
You can be an expert about the stone by standing, looking at it, and talking about it, and describing it, and taking pictures of it, and drawing it, and poking it with sticks.
Once you're on that stone, there's actually nothing to say.
Yeah, right.
And it's kind of nice to listen to you talking about this, but there's actually nothing to say.
Right. Well, I'm not saying anything.
I didn't want to go that far, but it's kind of interesting that there's this whole thing, and it happens in every religion, I imagine. I mean, I don't know much about religion, but every religion has the ways of describing the shore.
Yeah.
And people can make euphemisms about the stone, but it's always from a shore's perspective.
Yeah, exactly so. Exactly. They're standing in the house looking out the window describing the wonderful things they're seeing. You can see these amazing things out the window. They're out there.
And once you're on the stone, you can't describe it.
Yeah.
To yourself, let alone to anyone else.
No, because it's intrinsically, it's beyond describing, because it's beyond frames of reference. Yeah. And descriptions are artifacts of frames of reference. Because it's not referential, it's itself. Reality doesn't refer to something else. Reality is.
Yes.
You know, frames of reference refer to reality, so they have the luxury of being referential.
You gotta love this shit, really.
Oh yeah.
It's amazing.
It's the best.
Question. So, I'm not sure where I am in my process. I mean, it's sort of it's a little confusing. A lot of stuff I just sort of almost practice when I sleep. I try to just look at things totally generically when I sleep and try to pull out of a dream state if I can, and then sometimes I take a nap and just try to look at things generically as often as I can. I try to notice, and then there's little sort of blips of understanding and things like that, and then you have this moment where you feel another kind of a Kundalini kind of rumbling. Well, how does Kundalini fit into what you're talking about? Is it something
it's part and parcel of how reality works.
Right.
Kundalini is like the noise in the machine of the workings of reality.
Right, yeah. But is it something that is after the second step kind of thing, or is it something that happens between the first and second step, or
it can be either.
Yeah.
Well, but you bring up an interesting point, which kind of suggests to me we should start talking about the third step, because the third step, after the second step, when you have made the commitment, you've taken the plunge, you've jumped off the cliff. The third step is acquiring confidence, and this condition continually and ongoingly verifies itself, verifies its the fact that it is sufficient. It contains everything. It is the only condition. It's not dependent upon something else. It doesn't need anything else. It doesn't depend upon anything else. There's nothing unfinished or necessary or required. This condition, by its very nature, is doing everything with absolute perfection and with absolute unentrapment, with absolute freedom, with absolute joy, with absolute divinity, with absolute radiance. And the third step is the acquisition of a confidence that that is the case. So it can be murky, because phenomena of any step can look similar. There's no way of gauging it. The real gauge is whether you're in a frame of reference or not as your home base. If your home base is just wah, then you've made the second step. But you don't necessarily at that point instantly have confidence. And the third step is growing into the confidence that, wow, all these modes, I can go all these different places in here, and there's still this. There's still this. You can go to all of these different, experiential modes, and yet you just never leave this. And that just becomes, it continually verifies itself. So it just becomes clearer and clearer. It becomes, you get greater and greater confidence that in the obviousness that this is the case.
Right. Yeah. I was even thinking that this morning when I woke up. I don't know what I was dreaming about, some problem, and I thought, well, this is absolute perfection, and it's working absolutely perfectly, and I can just trust that.
Yeah.
I don't have to get a solution to the problem that I was thinking about. I can't remember what it was, but just that dawned on me again this morning. This is absolute perfection where I am now.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds to me like what you're describing is the second step, after the second step, working into the third step. But again, it's not really important to have it assessed, even for yourself.
Right.
It's useful to know about these steps because it kind of gives you a kind of a roadmap to whatever extent you can use that.
Right.
It may not be much of a roadmap, but it's the only one there is.
It's the roadmap of crazy.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Roadmap to nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, the second step is the departure from sanity. The first step is flirting with that there's other alternatives to sanity. Because sanity is synonymous with normalcy, which is synonymous with being a sheep and living within a consensus reality frame of reference.
Right, yeah.
Otherwise known as Apple Maps, right?
Well, it's funny because I don't really care about Kundalini, whatever happens. I mean, this is enough.
Yeah.
Whatever this is, that's fine. However it wants to show up, that's fine.
Yeah. But there can be, and there will be, just ongoing, never-ending explorations and tests where you try this and you try that, and you say, well, what about this? And you're checking things out, and you're exploring things, and you're going into different modes with a questioning attitude and all that. And that's totally viable. But again, as the third step becomes stronger, every time you're doing that, and as you're doing it, you'll be getting stronger and stronger. Yeah, this too, this is it too.
Yeah, it's got so much intelligence that you can trust it. However it shows up, it's got to be it's got to be perfect and right. Whatever shows up.
Yeah, the third step is about trust, perfection, rightness, and freedom, because it can't be entrapped. It's beyond the possibility of ever being trapped. It's beyond the possibility of being tainted. It's beyond the possibility of sin. It's beyond the possibility of of being damaged or being lost or being threatened in any way. It's absolutely bulletproof, let's say, in a modern parlance.
Right, yeah.
The Tibetans called it Vajra, which means diamond.
Right.
Because it's, that was the hardest thing they knew. The diamond couldn't be damaged.
Right. Well, sometimes I think, well, I'll have to act this way or that way, but I just noticed that the intelligence is so great, that however
Right.
I happen to think I'm acting, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter because
Right.
it's all, whatever happens is perfect.
Yeah.
I'm not even in the equation, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and yet it doesn't matter. You don't need to not be an individual self. You don't need to not be your neurotic personality. You don't need to not be your insecurities or your whatever, because that's it too.
Yeah, I know.
So and that's a really weird one. That's a strange one when you begin to get that really clarified. It's because it's like, no, it's all supposed to be like angels and light, and I'm supposed to be this Superman, and what's this neurotic, pathetic personality doing, sticking around,
Right. Yeah.
But it's not like that, because that's not what we think it is too. That's actually this amazing harmonics of astounding transcendental intelligence.
Right. Well, it's funny, just as a kind of a benchmark of how far I seem to have come, as I was talking to some people at an ashram today, and they were talking about spiritual things, and I was like, what are you talking about?
Tell me about it. Right.
I mean, it was really bad. I mean, I had to like bite my tongue. They're all talking about meditation and stuff. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, you might find yourself turning into a bit of an asshole from other people's perspective.
Yeah. Better not to say anything.
Yeah, right. If you don't have anything nice to say, just
Don't say.
My mouth is a will of its own.
Well, for me, that's a good new toy, even if I'm not second or whatever.
well, and it's not a game. It's not a matter of
push here and there now.
yeah, and it's not that this is better than that, or it's a race where you're winning or losing. It's not like that. It's just a sense of this mechanism, a sense of this process. The stages it goes through.
Mm-hmm. But the idea of try this and look for more confidence that
Yeah.
I'm not losing myself or making a mistake. Maybe.
And it's not literally true either that these three stages are actually sequential, where you go through this one and then that one and another one, because that's not true either. It's presented in those terms generally, but that's not actually necessarily the case. It may be in a certain way, predominantly so, but not necessarily. In other words, the mode of any particular step may be relevant at any particular time, no matter where you are, because you aren't really anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you're here, I'm in this, or I'm here, or I'm here. It's not, because you're not anywhere. You never were anywhere. And really, these three steps is the process of discovering that you're not anywhere.
Well, I have to listen to everything you're saying tonight carefully, because my default mode is trying too hard. So it's been really helpful for me all along. You say, okay, you're not doing any of it; it just takes care of itself. Oh, okay, good.
Well, that's
And
always the case.
I'm always clinging to that. So to say, well, you can have an intention, or you can really need this, or that just leads me down a bad.
It's not that you can have an intention. It's just that intentionality, or what you might call intentionality, is not excluded.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you need to not have an intention.
I think the intention is just naturally there.
Yeah, it may. If it's there, it's there.
Yeah. So.
All of these motivations and urges and all that, they're all just radiance, and they're not personal, and none of them are either good or bad or anything at all. They're just like weather. They're like clouds in the sky, or like storms coming through, or whatever. I mean, however you want to try and metaphorize it.
Well, that's easier and easier to see that. But I like the idea of trying out.
I mean, another, to completely change the subject. And another thing that Lily and I were talking about the other day is that your nature is your challenge. Your nature is your path. Because, well, everyone. Your biggest challenge is who you are. Your biggest asset is who you are. Your path is who you are. And your goal is to discover that you're more than who you are without needing to not be who you are.
And your biggest predicament is who you are.
Yeah. So, so all of these, you start talking about intentionality or urges or obsessiveness and all this. These are both our strengths and our weaknesses. These are the playing field. Mm-hmm. These are the battlefield that this process is enacted upon. It's that very conundrum, the paradox of I'm me. How weird is that? What do I do with this mess?
I mean, it seems in a way like that's the stone.
That's what I was just thinking.
That's that there. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about tangibility. About there being, reality being predictable in a certain sense, even though it isn't predictable at all. But there is some benefit in being able to see the scope of the predicament we find ourselves in order to see that in fact that the predicament we think we're in has actually no validity at all.
Right. Yeah.
So it's sort of it is like a stone in a way.
I'm not sure what you mean by stone.
Like you're saying, take that step onto the stone.
Right. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Right.
And it's sort of like being able to quantify what we think is real, and then find that in fact it isn't at all.
Yeah. Exactly so.
Yeah.
Letting go of what we're used to thinking is real is what stepping off the shore is about.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, once you let go of that, what you're left with is what is real, because that doesn't go away.
Right. Well, it's always been there. Too.
Yeah.
But it's these things that we think are real that keep us from seeing that.
Exactly so. Our delusion, our confusion, our misinterpretation.
So I'm finding some benefit in, surveying, current reality to see, what in fact I think is going on.
Yeah.
And to realize
Yeah. Whatever you think is definitely not it. Because what is going on is unthinkable. So if you can think it, you can cross it off. You don't need to stop thinking it. Just know that it's not accurate.
But there's, the part of spiritual dilemma too, for me in the past, has been maintaining myself in a state of unreality. That's sort of like another thing altogether.
Yeah, that's
moving into what I think reality is, and then going beyond that is helpful.
Yeah, good. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Rather
than so much
everything in la la land.
Yes, so much of what what poses as spirituality is basically enforced fantasizing. Mm-hmm. Where you inhabit a fantasy that is being more or less sold to you. Or like playing a game, like a children's game. Like, okay, children, let's all pretend such and such. But of course, true spirituality is exactly the opposite. True spirituality is about moving into reality, into actuality, which turns out to be much better than any fantasy could be. Fortunately, it just happens to be.
Someone's made an interesting comment on here. It's not, they didn't phrase it as a question, but I'm going to read it anyway. They'll sigh. So many things that Peter is talking about is easy to see cognitively or intellectually, but those frames of reference are operating inexplicitly, not front and center in awareness.
Right.
The automatic default is etc.
Exactly. That's our challenge, is that we think that these frames of reference are objectively true. We don't realize that they're arbitrary and that we are maintaining them by our belief. They're belief systems. And belief doesn't operate on the level of intentionality or conscious thought. That's the big challenge with frames of reference is we think they're true. Which is why a good strategy or one possible interesting strategy is outrageous denials, like you don't have a body, there is no space, there is no time. It's not that that's necessarily literally true, but it challenges, it startles the self-evident certainty of the belief. No, of course I have a body. What are you talking about? You're nuts. Of course there's space. Of course there's time. What are you talking about? But then but just in that startlement is an opportunity to look and with fresh eyes, from a fresh perspective, so to speak, and maybe discover that wow, there's things are slippery, things are multidimensional, things are multifaceted, things are not this or that. They're shades of gray.
So, are those insights also frames of reference?
They may or may not be. It depends if you're using the insight to jump to another frame of reference or not.
Well, the insight itself, regardless of what you do with it, but that, to me,
it depends what you mean. If an insight is, oh, this is such and such, then that's a frame of reference. If the insight is, oh, this isn't such and such, then that's moving out of a frame of reference, either to another frame of reference or not. So if I say you don't have a body, that's not saying you don't have a body, you're such and such, which is all of a sudden suggesting another frame of reference. But you don't have a body just leaves you hanging. It's like, what? What do you do with that? It's like...
Well, I'm talking about the insight of having seen a frame of reference.
Right.
Having seen something that you thought was real, you can see that it isn't. So that seeing, I'm wondering if you're talking about that seeing as just being...
That seeing is not intrinsically a frame of reference. You may slip, it can be very insidious. You may slip subtly into a frame of reference from that.
But that is...
But frames of reference are not seen from the point of view of frames of reference. Because, of course, frames of reference are inert. Frames of reference are not sentient. Frames of reference are objective. Frames of reference don't see anything.
Right.
So what sees is entirely transcendental. What's seeing your experience is entirely transcendental and always has been.
And is that the you?
Sure. You can call it, it's definitely the you.
That is...
But you can't find, it's the you that, it's the only you that has ever been, but it's not really a you. It's an absolute inconceivability. What's looking through your eyes is inconceivable. You can't go look for it, and you'll have your mind blown because you won't find anything specific. But it's certainly not nothing.
It's as close as you can get to a you
Well,
or an identity.
Yeah, it is you. It is your real identity, but it's not an identity because an identity is a thing or it collapses down to an entity, and it's not an entity. It's an actuality, but it's not an entity in any simple sense.
You certainly can't find it.
Exactly.
But when it appears or when it arises,
Yeah.
It is an experience, and
Well, it is experience, or experience is it.
it seems to be. I don't know whether it's an illusion of a self. It seems to be a real self. It seems to have an honesty to it, a truth to it.
Yeah.
That.
Well, what sees is true. It's true. It's not honest or dishonest. It's just transparent. It's like a perfectly clear window.
Yes.
So it can't.
You can see
It's neutral. It's absolute neutrality, but at the same time, it's an absolute positivity because it's always intensely and dynamically engaged with everything. and it can easily masquerade as or be interpreted in all sorts of different ways from within frames of reference. So you can interpret it, along, typically. Everything about frames of reference is wrong. I mean, this is why they're so slippery. Frames of reference take things that have nothing to do with each other or that don't really exist in themselves and lumps them together into gestalts and then hangs labels on them and calls them things. So, in a very simplistic sense, I might be, a sort of a gestalt of this transcendental power that's seeing my experience, as well as my, dominant personality characteristics or neuroses, as well as my obsessive urges or desires or whatever, as well as my dark side, repressed things that the personality, is in tension with, and all that might be held as a gestalt of, oh, that's me, but this is taking phenomena on very different levels and lumping them all together and putting them on the same level as if they were one thing. Because what's seeing your experience is one thing and it's absolutely real. All those other aspects of your personality are energies objectively that appear within that subjectivity. And so they are not, you can't lump them together. They aren't the same. The energies of your personality are things being seen in the window. They aren't the window. The window is not a good analogy because it's not just a clear window that you're seeing through. The window is also what's seeing. So it's a kind of a mythical window that is sentient.
More like a mirror, in fact.
Yeah. The mirror is often used as an image, but. So the real you is not the personality energies. Those are objects, circumstances that appear, that are impermanent, that have a dynamism, that have an evolution, they come and go. The real you is this amazing transcendental sentience that experiences everything. And actually is everything, because the energies that appear in it are actually it, in the same sense that a dream is actually the dreaming consciousness. But it's not, but to say it is, but it's also different than the dreaming consciousness, because the dreaming consciousness is transcendental, is not trapped in the dream, even as the dream is made of nothing but the dreaming consciousness. So it's kind of, you can't analyze it simplistically. So, what I call circumstances, which are experiential characteristics, let's say energies with flavored energies that appear in experience, which can be on any level. They can be sensory energies, they can be, thought energies, they can be emotional energies, they can be, whatever. In other words, any content in experience is one thing. It's all basically the same thing. What I call radiance. It's just energies that bubble up and down. It's like a dream. It's just energies that bubble up and bubble down and have their own life. Inconceivably, it's inconceivable what they are, and it's inconceivable why they are and how they are, ultimately. And yet they are the only thing that's going on. And they appear in this absolutely transcendental clarity that experiences them and that is untainted by them. In the same sense that this perfectly clear window or mirror is not affected by what is seen through it. And so you are the mirror. You are the glass. And you are the energies that appear too, in a funny way, but you're not entrapped by them. You're not actually them. They are phenomena of you. They're like shadows being cast by your movement, let's say. I mean, this is a very sloppy metaphor. But they aren't, they appear qualitatively, but they aren't anything that has any impact on anything. In the same sense that a dream appears qualitatively, but it doesn't actually have any impact. When the dream's over, it's like poof, may as well never have happened. There's no residue. There's no, there's nothing to clean up.
But calling them they already makes them more real than they are.
Right. It's a verbal phenomenon calling they. They are real. They're actually
real, but they
Yeah.
don't have any existence.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the miracle of radiance. Radiance is very strange stuff because it's apparent, but you can't find it. It's not anything. It's apparent, but it's not anything. And all circumstances whatsoever, no matter how we're used to classifying them as objective, subjective, outside, inside, physical, mental, whatever, any experiential quality whatsoever that makes up circumstances is radiant. It's nothing whatsoever. It's just the vehicle of the intelligence. The intelligence is creativity for its own transcendental reasons, which are totally inscrutable. So even calling it reasons is ridiculous. And on that note, why don't we have a little break?
One message. Oh, sleep.
Okay. All right. One final thing. What?
She was going to say something. No, I'm sending something to them. They
Oh.
asked.
Oh, you're saying something. Okay. Well.
If we cut it off there, it cuts off the chat room too.
Okay, you're right.
I'll leave the chat. I'll leave the chat room on. I'll leave if one leaves the chat. I'll leave the chat room on.
She sent a message already.
I did, but you can leave it on.
Okay, the chat room's going to stay on even though we're on break, and even though there'll be nothing to watch.
There'll be a chair,
Voices in the background.
voices in the background, and a chair.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi,
Beth.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Helen.
Hi, Diana.
I'm Peter.
Sure, I can move my things out of here. No, I'll just move them.
I can't deal with this one anymore.
Yeah.
No, it's okay.
Your feet are recording.
No.
I can tell I'm still sick. Yeah, right. Definitely turn the phone. Yeah, I went to Kaiser a couple of days ago, and then you said, well, they just, nothing really. I mean, I actually got a flu shot at that time, which was not really for it, but for the future.
NL.
They gave me a stronger
I had M11. How you must be Michael.
Started looking fresh. That's good.
Huh? Contraction.
Duration.
Expansion.
Yeah, right.
Just
You know, you're at a good set somewhere. You recognize all the crystallization of ideas that you
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, good. Oh, that's nice. Oh, okay.
I was in a today.
I was putting my head birds on out of the sun.
You know, just feeling like nothing is better than anything else. No experience.
You still have your preferences though.
Oh yeah, they're all just
But having a preference or not is not better or worse. That's
yeah. I find myself really
you can be a
crispy, alert, curious about people.
oh, that's nice.
Terrified.
I don't know why. I mean, like I said,
But
it
you
doesn't
know,
make any sense.
being a snowtrooper or a bully. Neither of those is any worse. It's nice when you get there, though.
It just feels very crispy.
Crispy critters.
Clarity.
That's right.
Don't even talk about this stuff. It's like anything anybody talks about is just everybody just talks too much. Oh, but you know, I just was listening to the last.
We don't know where that plays.
That's right. Slippery slope.
The one in November.
Uh-huh. That's the date.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll just look at
The
the
second Saturday.
Huh?
Oh, she's in
10? Okay.
Try to look at every
Sort
night's
of like
birthday.
double-sided coin, each one here where I'm thinking it's good and everyone else in the world thinks it's
There was a good crowd there that day, too.
I'm not quite sure how to reconcile all of that. People take things and stuff.
Oh yeah.
You went down?
It's very easy. They're wrong.
No, usually.
I mean, this,
No, I don't.
you know, that's something you just have to stick around.
I enjoy going down there.
I'm taking great heed.
Yeah. It's just for the day anyway.
That's been going a long time. When is it on? It's more hard.
Nice. It's probably nice and the longer you cook it, the better. So
Yeah.
that's the good stuff. That's the private reserve.
Oh, it's decaf too.
Oh, right.
What's wrong with this?
Right, some chai, that's what's one of the pictures.
I feel like we kids did it.
Some water, I see dessert,
Kids in your head.
seafood, but I don't see any chai. You guys can say
You have to know what you're doing.
we can actually get this to Michelle.
See the New York one?
No, here was basketball. The one in New York was her boyfriend. To see her boyfriend's brother who lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Oh God. The empty chair again. Isn't it always empty though?
That pie is very good.
Who brought that pie? Did you bring it?
Jeremy,
Direct to you.
Jeremy's pie guy.
Yeah, it was a really good thing. Stuff is good with pie.
I tried to get one of the Thanksgiving and it sold out like years more.
You gotta call ahead.
Yeah, you have to order it.
Well,
You have to order it like 3 days before.
oh no.
Where is it from then?
Listen pie. Cool.
We have someone who lives in the city.
That's a really good.
Yeah. Whereabouts in the city do you live?
I live in Mission, near 24th and Sparrow. Yeah. Pretty good. It's getting a lot cooler too. Yeah.
You're on the Mission Noe border.
Actually, called the Mission Sparrow.
Oh yeah, sure, that's right. San Francisco General Racing.
Yeah, it was fine. You work here at Panhandle? Where do you work?
Working at Japan. I've been in Ella. Couple blocks from St. Mary's.
Right.
I used to, you know, just take me off the Panhandle.
Yeah.
For Jaws. Like one of my
It's not
coworkers
possible,
said,
too much sugar.
how are you doing?
It really was.
Not around here.
I don't think that's conceivable.
Cool man, but
It's not conceivable, not possible.
no.
That's what I thought too.
Where you were. Yeah.
Well, that's nice.
Yeah, it's 9 minutes from.
Very short commute.
Yeah.
Excellent. How good?
Did you ever see that movie Michael, where John Travolta plays an angel on Earth?
A long time ago.
There's one scene where he's putting sugar in his coffee or something. He's going like this, piling it in. You know, it's bullshit. That sugar is bad for you. Have as much as you want.
Yeah.
I'm with him.
Yeah, there's quite a few angel movies that are like that. You know, where the angels kind of caught on to the fact they couldn't pretty much do anything. They're not with them doing anything.
Talking about angels, I'm still reading Lamb.
Oh yeah.
That's so much fun.
Yeah. He's a fun writer.
Stick shift because they're driving the vehicle.
He went to another level with Lamb.
So you just kind of follow
Yeah, it's a whole different genre almost.
Dog Sniffy, what needs to go
I don't know if I gave you the one.
It is.
In a way, probably his funniest one, which also is about an angel, but it's very, very, very absurd. It's called The Stupidest Angel. Did I give you that one?
No.
Remind me sometime. I'll loan you that one because
What's stupidly strange, honey?
no, we're talking about what's his name, Michael Moore,
Oh yeah.
Christopher Moore.
No, it's not Michael Moore. Christopher
Yeah.
Moore.
Yeah, I was saying that in many ways I think his funniest story, his most ridiculous, completely absurd story is The Stupidest Angel.
Oh yes.
Remember that one? It's
Yeah.
just so. It's just this
But I like them all.
this angel is just so fucking clueless and does everything wrong. It's great fun.
Who likes that?
And it's just completely absurd. I mean, the story has zombies and I mean one thing and another, just
He's a writer.
one fuck up after another.
Very funny stuff, but he's got a whole bunch. The one that made it most famous was the one called Lamb, which was supposedly about Christ's missing 30 years. You know, the 30 missing years. Christ and his friend Biff. And of course, it's completely ridiculous. That one was one of my favorites. Then, of course, being raised Catholic, I kind of liked the story coming with this, you know. Aha, Christ was out there having fun.
But he didn't. He would never fuck.
He what?
He would never fuck.
That's right, he didn't. Well, but he was still sort of, you know, living vicariously through Biff. He'd be listening on the noises in the room next door.
He was
Describe what you're
he
stealing.
was probably jerking off a lot and
Yeah.
behind closed doors, you know.
I like the story about
We still on
the sea monster.
Yeah, the sea monsters.
Yeah, that's great fun. That's one of my favorites.
Lusty.
The lust lizard of Melancholy Cove.
Yeah. Right. That was. I think that was my
His
favorite.
titles are great too.
Well, should we come back here?
Sure.
Okay, let me punch record on the audio. And the poor video people have been stuck with us the whole time.
That's okay. They don't
Okay, we're back online.
They were very happy about it.
Oh, good. Well, we'll start doing that then. I hadn't thought about
I've
that.
been telling you to do this.
I didn't know it killed the chat room. It occurred to me just a minute ago, another aspect of the third step of the three Zogshed steps is that its hallmark is the discovery of authority. You discover what the real authority is, and so you'll hear people talking, and you just get that people talk because they think that someone told them that that's what it is, but you have the real authority because you just know what is true, And from that perspective, you know, it's just it's not a contest. It's not even a debate. It's like, no, wrong. And that's a sign of the third step. Not that that's particularly
That's always been there.
important.
For some of us.
Yeah. Farther along the recovery.
That authority is transcendent.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I really like that insight. I mean, that to me is like the whole block game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I guess you place yourself in situations that enable that to happen.
Yeah. Sure.
And it's not something you can, doesn't seem to be something that you do. I mean, it's something that comes, that happens.
Yeah, it does ultimately, and you discover more and more as you mature that there's nothing but insight, and that experience itself is essentially ongoing insight. And insight has the interesting property of tending to spin off as a solidification. It tends to ossify itself as what it is, even as it remains what it actually is, which is transcendental and not specifiable. Because there's always those sort of, two aspects. It unendingly spits off these virtual, solidifications of what it is. that of course aren't.
Yeah, it always feels like the frames of reference are just sort of reaching up and always trying to sort of like grab you,
Yeah. They're always here. Yeah, but it just spins those off, I mean, I used to call them. I had this term, resonant modes, that I used for that, and it just unendingly spits out resonant modes, spits out hypotheses about what it is. It's constantly, because it's very, one way of thinking about what's going on here is reality is looking at itself, wondering, what am I? And it's continually answering that question. It's continually saying, oh, maybe I'm this, maybe I'm that, maybe I'm this, maybe I'm that, maybe I'm this. I mean, it's too fast for anything to break down into discrete. But even as it's answering the question, what am I, it's not really answering the question. So it's just constantly spitting out these answers that are partial, while still being the transcendental actuality that it is.
And also spinning out ideas about what you are too.
Yeah.
That's what this is. What the whole,
Yeah, just every which way. Apparent circumstances. It always presents as apparent circumstances, and yet circumstances aren't really circumstances. They aren't really coherent. They aren't really what they seem to be.
Right. Yeah.
And so they exist in this transcendence, which they actually consist of, even as they appear to not be that, to be something sort of specific and circumstantial. And that's the great trap, is to, if you relate to your experience in terms of circumstances, if you relate to it in terms of what it looks like it is, and believe that, you're screwed. And that's what ignorance consists of. But you get that this transcendence presents these virtual apparent circumstances, these modes, unendingly, without actually collapsing down to being that coherently.
So, Peter, the virtual modes are the radiance?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Everything that presents is radiance, and the radiance presents itself with endless degree of sort of fractal patterning. And the patterning is what is interpreted as being circumstances. But because it's fractal, it only seems coherent if you don't look too closely. If you look closely, it goes and opens up into weirdness. And then you see that even the apparent circumstances, the apparent specifics, the apparent details of experience can't really be found. I mean, this is why one of the most powerful modes of noticing is to be really attentive to details. Noticing is not about spacing out, going into something else. Noticing is about being really present with the actual details of experience, up close and personal. And that's when things get weird. That's when, the sort of the subtle, call it the multidimensionality of experience becomes apparent. And you get that all of these apparent patternings have, like layers within layers within layers within layers of qualities, of qualitative patterns that they present, which aren't really coherent, which don't really gel into anything solid, and they're dynamic and they're unresolvable and so on and so forth. So there's endless patterning, but the patterns aren't really of anything, but they seem to be of something if you don't look too close. And this is what we do. We just sort of glance and we go, oh, there's a room and there's people sitting and it's a conversation, And on a superficial level, that's an easy take to make. But when you really go into the details, it's like, whoa, wow, there's a lot going on here. There's just all kinds of subtle, nuance and weirdness and this stuff. That very rapidly you get beyond describability, you get beyond what can be said.
But the room also exists.
Sure, the room exists, but it's not a matter of canceling the room.
But it's not actually the room that you imagine it to be.
Yeah, it's much more than that.
Yeah. But it is a room with people in it, nonetheless.
Yeah, as much as it ever was. It's not a matter of canceling out mundane reality. It's a matter of augmenting it. Mundane reality turns out to be a tiny, tiny slice, a tiny, tiny interpretive mode or interpretive perspective on something which is vast and inconceivably multidimensional.
i.e. not mundane at all.
Not mundane at all. But the mundane is that, so the mundane is not mundane at all, even though it seems to be mundane if you don't look too closely, if you just take it on its surface, take it on its first take.
It seems as if Dzogchen is not necessarily focused that much on the first step. They seem to assume the first step. It's like,
Well,
assume the point of view and then.
in a way, actually, most of written Dzogchen is about nothing but the first step, because there's not much else you can talk about. The second and the third step are just sort of what you do with that. The first step is what the actual condition is, and Dzogchen texts go into great detail about presentation of what this actually is, in contradiction to what we're used to thinking it is. But of course, the theory, the description of what it is not so important, except as a support. You have to have the direct experience of it, which is why it's said that Dzogchen, it can't be taught. It's not a philosophy. It's it's very much a yoga. You have to, if you aren't actually in it, you can't do it. You can't do Dzogchen from outside. Becoming a scholar of Dzogchen is not Dzogchen.
Peter, so I find myself putting effort in getting some perspective on my process, my spiritual process, if you want to call it anything. And so I'm always looking to see if I'm going forward, but we can't really tell whether we're having more clarity or better noticing, or if we're going forward. We just can't really know that, right?
Yeah, you can't know, but there's nothing wrong with trying.
Because it feels to me like I always feel like I need to be putting out some effort in, making some, just doing something to go forward and to maybe have better noticing or more clarity or something like that. So just.
Yeah, that's great. That's okay. That's okay, because it's your nature. It's your mode to do that. It's your it's your temperament, you might say, to function in those ways. So by all means, use your play to your strengths. Use your temperament, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But ultimately, you can't tell whether you're improving or not, because where you're going to is a condition where there is no improving or not. And you can't know where you are, because where you're going to is a condition where there is no knowing where you are. So the fact that you can't know where you are and the fact that you can't know how you're doing is actually good noticing.
And we're already there anyway.
Yeah. And so noticing is noticing what is already the case. Even if you seem to be coming to it by degrees, it's not being developed by degrees. You're just noticing it by degrees, perhaps. Or maybe you're noticing it fully each time, but you're taking it as being by degrees.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? Maybe.
Yeah.
But no, it's all good. Application is fine. There's nothing wrong with with working with it, with approaching it, experimentally or with intention.
Well, I think one change that I've noticed is that I'm more curious now in what's happening. I could be talking with someone and I feel very curious about what they're saying, but then I feel like what they're saying is it's just nonsense anyway, because it's meaningless, but I still feel that curiosity there.
Yeah.
Which I don't know what I'm being curious about, but.
Well, you don't need to be consistent, because another part of noticing is discovering that there is no consistency. There's all sorts of seeming aspects of phenomena that present themselves, and they don't fit together at all. I mean, good noticing, good spiritual progress is actually your world starts to come apart, not your world starts to make more sense.
Oh, okay.
Because the world doesn't make any sense. The world is not coherent. The world doesn't fit together in a simple way. And so, you'll be all kinds of things going on that won't have anything to do with each other, and you'll be wanting to go this way, and another part of you wanting to go that way, and it's like, oh, that's weird. Cool. So you learn to be comfortable. You learn progressively to be more and more comfortable with this incoherence, be more and more comfortable with things not making sense with each other, things not working together. And it's just whatever it happens to be is what it is, and you just let you let things be what they are more and more. You be a little more and more easy with your modes, and so you'll have an urge to go to do such and such, you do it, and you have another urge to not do it or to do something else. That's happening too. Okay, cool. And so you just sort of you settle into not making sense, because this in actuality doesn't make any sense at all. And our worldviews are all oriented around trying to, in some kind of a subliminal way, usually a nonsensical way, but some kind of a trying to make sense of things, trying to present some kind of a coherent version of things. And in actuality, that doesn't exist. There's no coherent version of things. This is weirder than weird in actuality. But you're like we were talking about earlier. Your nature, your temperament, is your tool, is your vehicle. So play to your strengths. Use your modes. So whatever your natural inclination is, use that. So if you're applying yourself and you're really trying to make headway, great, use that. But you just use it intelligently, use it gently, use it playfully, use it, be prepared to be surprised. Don't stay on the tracks. If the train sort of takes off, leaves the tracks and starts heading off into a field, it's like, oh, okay, cool. Tell me about it.
That kind of relates to something I was wondering what it means to be what it is to be embodied, and because there's a certain. Recently, I've heard you talk a few times about death, and I used to have this kind of unskillful belief that this is messed up, but soon I'll be dead, and then everything will be revealed. But you were talking about this, and it's like in the Tibetan Book of the Dead that you don't. About latent tendencies that would just play themselves out in that situation. There's not the wherewithal or recourse for self-awareness. We occasionally have.
There may or may not be. There will be different modes. But, the powerful fact is what is the case here is what is always the case. This is beyond. What is the case here is not the case because you're alive. And it's not going to not be the case when you're dead. And it's not the case because you're awake, and it doesn't become not the case when you go to sleep or you start dreaming. What's the case here is the case. In other words, this condition, that what's happening here is what's always happening. And all these various conditions, including life and death, are just the ways that it presents itself. So, which is a very powerful fact. So you're not going to gain or lose anything. So, which is great news, because that means that you can work right now, and this is the final, you're working on the final product. And whether or not you finish the work before you die is largely irrelevant because the essential condition isn't going anywhere. It's not dependent upon bodies or space or time or causality or anything like that. On the contrary, it is what's doing all that. All of those different modes are just aspects of its appearance.
So when I'm dreaming, mostly feels like just latent tendencies, just stuff happening, and then there's rare moments of lucidity where you realize it's a dream, and that changes your perspective completely. And then waking life seems also, to a large degree, it's like automatic patterns.
It's the same. Waking life is just latent tendencies too. The amazing power of waking life is it can pretend it isn't. It can convincingly convince itself that it's not just, automatism.
Mm-hmm.
You can seem to be purposeful. It can seem to be like, oh, I'm doing this,
Yeah.
That's the strange aspect of waking life. Not that it's actually different, but that it can pretend to itself convincingly to be different. Like, oh, now I'm awake. Now I have a handle on things. My hand's on the tiller. Yeah, right.
So it's like going back to the sentient mirror analogy. It's like another aspect, in addition to personality and all that other stuff you listed. There's an aspect of that arises of I'm doing this, or
doership, sense of doership.
Yeah, and then a real ability to believe that.
Yeah, and it's very subtle and multidimensional because in fact you're doing everything. What you actually are is doing everything. So you are the doer. So that's where the sense of doership authentically comes from that fact, but it gets subverted and confused through misinterpretation of the partialities are agents of the doing. The personality aspects are doing, whereas they're being done.
Yeah.
But there is doership, and it's actual. But the trick is to see what's actually doing everything. That's really the essence of noticing, in a way, is to see what's doing everything. Take anything and see how. God, I'm seeing something right now. Where's this light coming from? What's putting this light here? That's the high water mark of noticing, and it's easy to think, oh, that's just this subtle thing way somewhere over there. It's not. No, it's right here. It's accessible. What's doing it is right here. It's being done right here. So it's not an abstract question or a theoretical question or some kind of difficult to get at question. It's like, well, what's really doing this? And if I look at it, it's like, well, wow. And when I see, well, what's putting this floor in my field of vision, and then what's putting this sensation in my field of touch, what's putting this thought in my field of mind, and lo and behold, it's the same thing. There's this one force, this one radiance that, bang, shines everything forth. Even though it all seems to be very different textually and exists on different levels and different spaces and all of that, it actually isn't. It's actually just bang, just this one flash. And you're doing it. What you actually are is doing it. And this is accessible. This is really good meditation, is to be with this. This is the high water mark in Kashmir Shaivism. They call that principle spanda, which is the primal throb, the primal flash, the primal creative, explosion of Shiva, of the divine, of the transcendental, of reality itself. Single-handedly and unmediatedly does everything. And this is not an abstraction. This is concreteness. This actually is that. And when you see that, it's the short path, because right away you're beyond personal and impersonal, you're beyond subject and objective, you're beyond all of these considerations, and yet inclusively, all that comes with, which is the very nature, the very essence of realization.
Clearly, I don't I mean, stuff all flashes out of who knows where.
Yeah.
And even the thoughts, which, you know, you could have the feeling, I could have the feeling I'm thinking like they're just, if I look, I'm not thinking them, they are peering out of somewhere.
Yeah, the thought appears, and the sense that you're doing it also just appears.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know, I also see that I don't know what I am, and if I look, and at that point, this idea of what's me and what's not me doesn't make sense.
Right.
And then it seems a step further to say I'm doing it, doing all this.
Well, just see what is doing all of it, and you'll see that that's the only thing that there is.
Right.
So by default, it has to be you. If you're anything at all, you're it.
Right.
Because there's nothing other than it left over. There's no remainder. There's nothing over here that could also be a culprit. You know?
Right.
And this is seeable, and it's subtle because you say, God, it's just coming from nowhere. God knows where. You can't say. Yeah, you can't say because it's not a thing that you can say. But when you get over that, the fact that it's entirely transcendental, it's also actual. It's an actuality. But it's not something you can approach by encompassing it, by defining it, by saying what it is. But that doesn't mean you can't approach it. That doesn't mean you can't be with it very, very intimately. But it's a different kind of thing. It's a not thing, and yet it's complete. It's actual. It's in fact, it's the actuality. So, but again, this is kind of an art form to be able to have the subtlety, to be able to be with that, because it's such a different kind of a mode than we're used to approaching our experience in terms of. We're so used to being with things that seem to be something.
Yeah.
But you can get at it just by, you can feel the force of the present moment. I mean, like the force of time moving or something. I mean, you know, again, you can't specify this, but there is some dynamism, there is some charge, there is some oomphiness that is palpable in experience, and this is directly an aspect of this primal force, this primal creativity. It's literally in real time doing all of this. And so that's one of the tricks to kind of, you know, sort of just feel this. You know, it's like the liveliness of your experience, the liveliness of your sensations. You know, the sparkle of the light, just everything. It's just the liveliness of what you experience is this flashing energy, this positivity, you know, that is, it's actual, it's real. And it's literally palpable, experientially palpable.
It's all dynamism and all charge.
Yeah.
That's all there is.
Yeah.
And then there's the thing of some kind of a filter, like you have an analogy of like a camera with like some kind of video camera with a stabilization feature.
Yeah.
That kind of filters it out or makes it seem.
Yeah, but it doesn't actually do that. That's just because that's actually being created as well. That's actually part of the flash.
That's dynamic as well.
So it doesn't actually block it. It just confuses it.
Right.
While actually being evidence of it.
Well, I wouldn't say it was confusing it as well. I would say that it's part of the component of more creation.
Well, that's what I'm saying, yeah. Anyway, you know, it's again, it's subtle because it's not a mode we're used to being in historically.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a mode of functioning, a mode of engagement, a mode of seeing that we're used to acknowledging, you know, historically, and it's not something we can even talk about. But it's actual.
It feels like there's an unlearning to do or reprogramming.
Yeah. Well, you just, you get more and more comfortable with just sort of doing the impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Just, well, this doesn't make any sense and I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to just do it anyway. And then just sort of let yourself do it.
Right.
And something happens.
Yeah, well, it's weird because when you say, like, go to the energy, I know what that means. And
Yeah.
I can experience that. Then
That's
it's like,
sure.
what is it? How could that? It doesn't make any sense. Even that doesn't make sense. Because
Yeah. Well, none of this makes sense. I mean, you leave making sense behind from the get-go, practically. If you're insisting on staying with making sense, you're just going to stay on the front porch. You're not going anywhere. You can't, because reality makes absolutely no sense. And so immediately once you begin, if you for real begin to approach it or engage with it, you leave making sense behind totally.
yeah,
It's completely irrational. It's
so you get
completely
more comfortable
miraculous.
with it not making sense.
Yeah, you be loose. You be loose. You get. I mean, this is our big challenge. We were talking earlier in terms of the model of frames of reference. This is really all about this. Actual spirituality is all about learning to be comfortable outside of frames of reference. And the mind keeps trying to assert frames of reference, and you learn all sorts of artfulness and subtlety, like letting it assert frames of reference without inhabiting them. And you sort of transparently move through them, even as it's throwing them up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Whereas our previous mode is to, grab onto any frame of reference that shows up, But again, there's a learning curve of subtlety and artifice just to be able to, to be loose enough and intelligent enough in a kind of a crazy way to do the impossible. I mean, our biggest advantage is that this is actual. This stuff is actual. So it's weird and it's transcendental and it's rational and it's nuts, but it's actual. It's real. So that's powerful advantage. I mean, you can literally reach out and touch it. So so it's not like you need to somehow get to it over there somehow. It's already right here.
Yeah.
So, and that's a real advantage because, it makes it. If you all you need to do is thrash around, and you'll be knocking into it.
Right. That doesn't go away.
Yeah,
Being
it doesn't go.
positive.
Yeah, it is the case. It is what is the case. It's not going away. It's completely, obviously, present, actual, and so it's actually doable to do these subtle things of being with it, even though you can't figure out how to do it. You can still do it anyway because it is actually actual. It's here. It's you find it. It's like being a blind person in a room you've never been in. Well, how do you find the bathroom? Just knock around, and sooner or later you'll find it.
Just go right where
Because
you
it's
are.
Well, there's that. That's real artifice.
That's efficient.
Or use your sense of smell.
And actually, that analogy is a very powerful one about this stuff too. Where do you find God? Right here.
So Peter, when you were talking earlier about the 3 steps of Dzogchen at the beginning, so the first step is being exposed to the truth, to reality.
Yeah, experientially. So you actually have experience of wow. It's called an experience of successful noticing, an experience that there's more. Experiential proof that there's more than you thought.
That's the first step?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But then typically when that happens. But then you're sort of seeing that as an actuality, but from your historical perspective, right? So you're still you, but you're seeing that and discovering it from you. And the second step is moving. Stop being you and be it. Where you let go of identifying or orienting to your habitual, to your historical frame of reference, and be in this actuality that you actually are in, that your historical frame of reference actually has been in all along. It's like unlocking the doors and leaving them standing open. At that point, there's no inside or outside. But you don't need to worry about that theoretically. In practical terms, just work with where you are. So if you're working with noticing and all that, just work with noticing, and it will spontaneously move into other phases when it's ready. Susan, you said there's a little cider?
Yes.
A little better. Can I get you one?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that'd be great.
Anybody else?
No? Good.
Strictly medicinal minded.
I know. I know. I'm a busy day driver. Have at it. The folks in the chat room are very grateful. A couple of them say, thank you for providing the opportunity to listen to these, and always appreciated these talks and stuff Peter posts on his website. So I told him I'd tell you.
I'm so glad.
Oh, guys, red. Christmas. Do you want some? No, I'm good. What's the flavor?
Blood orange.
Ooh, I had that before. It's good.
It is.
Did you get that at Bath Mall or something? Trader Joe's? Whole Foods. Whole Foods.
an important thing to remember is that none of these ways of putting things, we were talking about these Dzogchen principles and various other things, and basically everything we ever say, none of it is actually accurate. It's all just suggestive and intended to be useful to the extent that it is, as a jumping off point to notice this actuality that is here, that is completely unsayable and undescribable. So all these different formulas have some intelligence to them and have some utility to them, but they aren't literally true. So it would be a mistake to slavishly assume that, like these Dzogchen principles are gospel or are the law, and it has to be like this, and all this kind of thing. That's more suggestive, or has useful implications to the extent that it does.
It's really empowering to just be able to say wrong, like when you just look at everything that's out there.
Yeah.
And
the truth has never been said.
Yeah.
It can't be said.
Because you can get lost. You can get lost in a million things and thinking that's.
Well, that's the problem, and people do.
Yeah.
People credulously, innocently, by and large, people would, want to know, want to discover, and so they're, told all these wonderful formulas and theories and paths and isms, and, unfortunately, gullibly assume that they're true.
Yeah. And
none of them are. Which isn't to say that they're necessarily valueless, but they aren't accurate.
Right.
Reality transcends any way of putting it, any way of approaching it, any way of describing it.
There's some kind of intelligence required to be able to say, like, this is useful to me or it's not.
True spirituality is basically an IQ test. It's really that simple. You have to learn to break the rules. You have to learn to thumb your nose at tradition and convention and think for yourself. And then you begin to make headway.
I was bored and I was looking for something to read on my phone. I was sitting in a park or something. And I was just looking at the open web pages, and there was an open web page about Dzogchen, and I was reading it. I was thinking, wow, this is better than most of the random crap that I read on the internet, even if I'm trying to read about Dzogchen or something. And then I had forgotten, but then I realized later it must have been a link that I went to from your website or something, because it really resonated with me.
Yeah, there's some good stuff, but anything, no matter how good, is not gospel. It's not definitive. No one can say how it is. No one can say how it's going to be. No one can say how to do it. No one can say if you're going to do it, it has to be done like this.
Right.
It is helpful to have someone say it can be done.
Yeah, it can be done. It's actual. It's right here. It's accessible. And you already are it, so you have access. So it's really, it's really very simple and fundamentally. In fact, the more we try and approach it by formula and understanding and description, the more we're going to tie ourselves up in confusing knots. When you just drop all that stuff and just, be with this, then it's much simpler and more obvious.
So it's apparently helpful to hear somebody say that it's possible.
Yeah.
Like the third noble truth is an end to suffering.
Yeah.
Then, unless you really know it, it seems like you just
this
know it by degrees.
This is the power. This is the power of a spiritual preceptor.
Yeah.
Is in the phenomena called transmission and such, is that the fact that this is for real, it can be displayed.
Yeah.
And that's very empowering.
Right.
Because until that, it's just more fantasy. It's more pie in the sky, and it just sits up there with all your other fantasies and delusions, and they don't have any proportion or reliability.
Yeah.
But when you really get, wow, wait a minute, this is for real. That's really empowering, because then it's like there is an end to suffering. There is realization. There is reality. So it's reasonable for me to aspire to that.
Yeah.
Well, and going back to the place where you began tonight, stepping onto the stone, it is helpful, even if maybe through words that facts cannot be expressed specifically, to have someone who's speaking from that place.
Oh, sure.
To,
Well, it can be expressed, it just can't be definitively defined.
Right.
It can't be formalized into a definitive formula.
Teaching, yeah, but it's much more useful to have that available than to have someone who's standing on the shore pointing at the stone, and trying to say, we know where it is and how to get there. If you just do this, this, and this, then you'll,
Yeah. No, real satsang is powerful. I mean, in many traditions in India, it's been said for millennia. The spiritual path, whatever your tradition is, the spiritual path is find a holy man and go hang out with him. Whatever genre.
anyone will do.
If there is no space and time, how can proximity to someone who is enlightened seem to affect one's being?
Can't be said. You can't say how anything happens or doesn't happen, because what's happening and how it happens is entirely inscrutable. All you can do is empirically observe that it seems to be the case that that can occur.
But it's also not necessary.
No doubt. And there's not literally no time or space. Time is not what we think it is, and space is not what we think it is. It's probably a more accurate way of putting that. Space is not nothing. But the space that's here is the same space that appears in a dream. And where was that space in a dream before the dream started? Where is this space when you go to sleep? It's not nothing, but it's not what you think it is as some concrete, objective extension in any simple sense. Everything that happens is real. It's just way more and other and subtler than your wildest ideas about it. It's not that it's not actual. It's not a matter of negating it or, this is unreal, this is nothing. It's as real as it ever was. It's as real as it seems to be. In fact, more real. But what it is and how it is, in actuality, is completely mind-blowing. And it's quitting time. Well, good night, online people.